Welcome to CapitolView, where we discuss the latest in state government and politics. I'm Hannah Meisel with NPR Illinois. Joining us this week is John O'Connor of the Associated Press. Thanks for being here, John.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And also here is freelance reporter Sarah Mansur. Thanks for being here, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, another eventful week around the 4th of July holiday. Illinois got its first credit rating upgrade in 2 decades from Moodys Investor Service. It's not as if we have suddenly jumped to being totally creditworthy. We still, there's a map that shows, where we are in relation to other states. We're still the state with the worst bond rating across all 3 of those major Wall Street credit rating agencies. But, still in all, to be able to turn around the trajectory, to be able to turn around the narrative that, Illinois' finances are going down the drain, that, we're a lost cause, that's a cause for celebration for some, and certainly the Democrats who are in charge of state government. So, Sarah, I'll start with you. What did Moodys say about why they determined Illinois should get a credit rating upgrade from 1 notch above junk status to just 2?
Yeah. So the in the statement that Moodys made, they said that their decision was in part due to the state repaying last year's emergency borrowing and keeping the state's bill backlog in check. But it also, the statement from Moodys also noted, the long-term debt, structural debt. So it did seem kind of like a tempered upgrade that acknowledged that there were still problems and issues with the state's finances, but that it, like you said, it's moving in a positive direction, that the state has a balanced budget for the first time. And I mean, they have the past couple of years, but it's again a balanced budget. And so it's a positive, but it's still, like you said, there's still a lot to work on.
Yeah, I mean, we have those looming financial pressures. It's not just the massive $44 billion of unfunded pension liabilities that we still have, but it's also, increases in education funding that we need to make statutorily. It's a lot of things. But yeah, I mean, that pension, folks want to call it a crisis. Other folks say it's not a crisis, that we've known what we're dealing with. But either way, the way that, our pension payments are designed, we're not going to be out of it till 2045, if that. I mean, I think there are many actuaries who say, oh, well, I'm not sure that Illinois is dealing with reality here. But John, you've been around for a while. You've seen the history of credit rating downgrades, starting with the George Ryan years, the Blagojevich years for sure. And I think we were all around for the budget impasse and the massive credit rating downgrades that brought us to here, just teetering above junk territory under former Governor Bruce Rauner. But John, when did this begin? Some say we never recovered fully from the recession that we had after 9/11. What's your take on that?
Well, in terms of credit ratings, the bond rating houses credit ratings, I don't think anybody paid much attention to them until they started going down and going down steeply. When we got to the 1 step above junk status, that became sexy for the media to latch onto and to explain. It's very difficult to explain to taxpayers what these things represent. But when you say junk bond, people get an idea that we're not in very good territory. Now, as you pointed out, Hannah, in your story, where the rubber meets the road with these things when the state goes to borrow money, when it sells bonds on the open market to borrow money for long-term infrastructure, bricks and mortar type projects, essentially general obligation bonds that are backed by general revenue. And when the credit rating is low, Illinois, as you pointed out, is going to pay a higher interest rate. You know, we're a bad credit rating. If I'm gonna, you know, if I'm in debt and I go to buy a house, I'm going to pay a higher interest rate than somebody else who is more financially stable. But the irony here is that as the state has continued to borrow money, we see news releases from the Democratic administration saying we got great interest rates. You know, they still trust us, and the reality is, Illinois is not going to go bankrupt. You know, so even though its credit rating is one step above junk, there's always a way to pay off debt if things get really bad, and that's to raise taxes. And that's, you know, that's the reality of the thing. Illinois cannot default on debt like that. But it became weaponized during the Rauner years, particularly when Bruce Rauner, the Republican from 2015 to 2019, and the Democrats who ran the legislature couldn't agree on a budget. They went 3 years, you know, without an annual spending plan, and that does not look good in the bonding houses. So that's where it really started coming, you know, to the interest of people outside of Springfield, the money counters, you know, if you will, the experts, and. So it's as you said, Hannah, it's a good thing. Obviously, it's better to be in better financial shape than to be in junk status. But the way the Democrats celebrated it, as you said, we still have monstrous pension debt. We have and we have a change of definition here. For example, Governor Pritzker, the Democrat, describes the backlog of bills is what, $3 billion now, and he says we're now up to date. We don't have a backlog anymore. We're paying them on time, and $3 billion is still a lot of money. It's not as much as $17 billion, which is how bad it got at one point. But as you rightly pointed out, Hannah, we're not out of the woods.
No, and you know, I want a couple of things you said there. States they can't go bankrupt. You know, we saw in 2013, the city of Detroit went bankrupt, and that was a very rare municipal bankruptcy. You know, Puerto Rico, U.S. territory, is not in great shape. And so there's been discussions about Puerto Rico, you know, declaring bankruptcy, but states, I'm pretty sure it's settled law that states can't go bankrupt. And you're right. I mean, we still have all these levers available to us, whether there's political will to raise income taxes, whether there's political will to expand the sales tax to services, which has been discussed for many years. You know, that's another question. You know, in 2013, also, the legislature passed a, you know, pension overhaul law that was supposed to free the state from a lot of pension debt, and unanimously the Illinois Supreme Court said nope, that pension protection clause in the state's constitution is pretty darn ironclad, and we can't do anything about that. But you know, Sarah, we saw, you know, definitely self-congratulatory statements from Democrats, you know, saying, well, you know, we are the party of fiscal responsibility. We, you know, we are saving the state. It does, you know, you don't have to ruin lives. I think that was a quote, paraphrasing, from Senate President Don Harmon, who often tussled with Bruce Rauner back in the day. you don't have to ruin lives to get the state's fiscal house back in order. So I thought it was very interesting that they put out those statements, and then, but also, on the other hand, those who have for years been banging the drum that Illinois is, not worth saving, they had very little to say. And, in some of their little peeps, like, oh, we shouldn't trust what credit rating agencies say anyway. It doesn't matter. It's always, it's human nature to use something that in a way that's convenient to you. But yeah, Sarah, I mean, what do you see there?
I do think that the Democrats' celebration was premature, exaggerated, because obviously the state should be passing balanced budgets and paying back their bill backlog and funding their pensions at the rate that they should annually. So, I mean, these are things, and being improved just like a notch above junk status should not be a cause for celebration, I guess. But yeah, I think that the Republicans' arguments, they actually, I think, would argue that we should declare bankruptcy as a state. I think that's probably what they would say, that would be the fiscally responsible thing to do, that we should declare bankruptcy. But yeah, I think it's kind of expected that they would try to downplay this positive news that that the governor's administration put out. And I think that the Democrats, too, are trying to cling on to the narrative that this is a new day, that like state government is different now under J.B. Pritzker and Chris Welch, and this is just another example of that the state's finances are changing to a positive outlook. But there's still a lot of negative there that they have to improve upon. So,
if I may, Hannah.
Yeah, please.
As Sarah pointed out, the statement from Moodys noted that some of the pandemic relief had been paid back early. I think the state borrowed $2.5 billion and still owed $1.5 billion, it was coming due in December of 2023. So it had some time to pay that back. The Democratic leaders agreed to pay that off early. And in a conversation with Governor Pritzker, I said that shows, I have to say that especially for Democrats, that shows a great deal of restraint, because if you've got that money now, Democrats who are in charge of everything, the governorship, the House and the Senate, and they're the ones making the budget, the temptation would be, well, let's use that money now. We don't have to pay this debt, for a few more years. That's how we got into the pension mess, quite frankly, is that we'll put off paying the $3 billion we owe this year because it's not due for a long time. So I will say that in the Democrats' favor, that they showed restraint there, that they paid down debt first rather than adding it. It would have been very easy to add it to the budget and say, look how great we are, and pumping up the budget.
Sure. But, can I also point out that Illinois was the only state to have to take advantage of that Federal Reserve borrowing program that was made available last spring in the depths of COVID. And so, that shows a lot about where Illinois is at as a state. But I do want to move on. Sarah, this week, the governor signed a piece of legislation that's been brewing for about 2 years. That would allow college athletes to finally profit from their name, image, and likeness, sign endorsement deals, hire agents. This is a movement that's been talked about for, a decade or so, maybe a little bit more. It started with some lawsuits from former college athletes. And, in 2019, California implemented the first of its kind law, and then now Illinois is the 20th state to do this. So what does it mean? What did the sponsors want out of this legislation in terms of, fairness to players, but also, making Illinois a leader, even though Illinois is, like I said, 20th state, they still, we always want to tout how Illinois is doing things different and better.
Yeah. So like you said, this has been an issue for years that college athletes are almost treated like indentured servants. They're not being paid for their work. So this law, even though it doesn't allow athletes to be compensated by the school for their performance, they are allowed to make money off of their image and likeness from sponsors, like you said, like Nike or Adidas. But if it also limits, I think, if the school is partnering with Nike, then the athlete can't get money from Adidas. But still, it's definitely a step in the right direction. Because
but they can, sign on with a local restaurant or car dealership.
Right, and exactly, or like at the event, one of the women's basketball player at the U of I Ava Rubin was talking about how she wants to partner with a American Diabetes Association. That's a personal thing for her. So it does like open up these opportunities to not just work with businesses or corporations, but these like public, like a medical group or something like that. So that is. I think it's a positive thing. Cam Buckner, who's a member of the House of Representatives in Illinois, was a college athlete. So was Speaker Chris Welch. So it's a personal thing for them. And it's still not obviously going. It's not giving athletes, I think, or college athletes, maybe what some people think that they're entitled to, but it's a step in the right direction, I think.
Sure. And, I thought it was really, like you pointed out, Chris Welch, Speaker of the House, he played baseball at Northwestern. And he didn't say it at the signing ceremony the other day, but when he first introduced the bill, because he was the one who introed it in 2019, I feel like he talked about how even though he was from Southwest suburbs, getting to Northwestern, which is just in Evanston, it was difficult. He did not grow up in a wealthy family, and just being able to get to those two locations is difficult for him. He didn't have a lot of money, and you hear a lot. You hear anecdotes about not just Illinois, but college athletes across the country having to pick up second jobs, having to sometimes go to food banks, all while the universities, profit off of their athletic abilities. But John, what I thought was interesting, thinking back on how this played out in the last 2 years, was if you remember when Chris Welch introduced that legislation, House Minority Leader Jim Durkin was very against it. But he and a lot of Republicans ended up voting for it. And so, this is one of those few major pieces of legislation that ended up being bipartisan. Do you think that signals, that not everything in Springfield is as partisan as folks, want to, I don't know, make it seem like it is?
I doubt it. Things are always going to be partisan, and at least, well, let me say this: you're right in that there are times when publicly it appears that things are much more bipartisan. These people get along very well behind the scenes, but they represent different points of view, Republicans and Democrats, and there are conservative Republicans, there are moderate Republicans, there are conservative Democrats. And this one, I think, was a matter of common sense. As Sarah said, these athletes are often treated, and we're not, the elite Division I scholarship football or basketball player, he is not suffering. But as Representative Buckner told me, as you said, the women's softball player may be able to, she's not going to play pro. So she can, she's a big star in her hometown and can sign up with the local car dealer. And it's a step in the right direction. As Sarah said, it doesn't give athletes everything they want. In James Michener, who is a famous novelist, wrote a book in the mid-'70s called Sports in America, where he advocated for paying college athletes. This idea that that the amateur athlete is this innocent, wide-eyed, person from the plains is long over, and these universities make oodles of money on sports, and this is just an opportunity for players to get some of that.
Sure. And we've got about 5 minutes left, and I did want to touch on a couple things and group them together. Some investigations from some outlets this week that kind of put Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration in the hot seat yet again. From the Tribune, there was an investigation about what could the Department of Employment Security have done to prevent this tidal wave of COVID-related unemployment fraud. Let me read a little bit from the piece. Sorry about this. Records obtained by the Tribune show the flood of fraud happened after IDES failed to follow federal recommendations to adopt free fraud-fighting tools that were made available in 2019. Only recently did the agency begin using these tools. A separate process to help identify problematic claims also didn't become fully functional until February, nearly a year into the pandemic. And also, the administration has declined over and over to identify a, solid number of unemployment fraudulent payments that have gone out to these fraudsters. And then there was a couple other stories. WBEZ, published a story this a couple weeks ago and a follow-up this week about prisoner deaths. And it wasn't during the Pritzker administration, but in the final months of the Rounder administration, there were workers at a state-run mental health facility downstate that were indicted for, abusing residents there. And so, Sarah, governors, as we like to say in Springfield, governors own. So what do you think this means, specifically the unemployment fraud? Because that's probably the thing that the governor had the most control over, because it was made available in 2019 and he failed to do it. What do you think this is going to mean for the Pritzker administration going forward?
Yeah, I think the unemployment story is so interesting because it was such a widespread problem. I remember even the Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, talked about being targeted by fraud during the pandemic. And there are just so many issues. Like you said, we don't know how much money was lost to fraud. There were people who were given overpayments, who like needed to pay that back. And then, of course, there are Republicans that are complaining that the IDES offices are still closed, and that's something that the governor is also having to respond to. They may have opened recently. I actually realized I don't know if they have, but back during session and they were closed. So yes, I do think that these are things that the administration will have to answer for. They seem like pretty significant lapses or oversights that his administration probably should have known that there were tools available to try and stop this, and that they didn't. And so I definitely think he will try and talk around it, but it's something he will need to respond to.
Yeah, we'll probably talk more about this in future shows, but I want to point out this is on top of the horrific veteran deaths at the Quincy Veterans Home, where 36 died from a COVID outbreak. And so, heading into an election year, we have a lot. But John, just about a minute here, so please be as brief as you can. But you've seen a lot of elections, and you've seen a lot of governors come into elections with a lot of baggage. How do you think this will play as we go into election year?
I think one of the bigger issues for Governor Pritzker may be the prison issue. WBEZ revealed that there have been several inmates allegedly beaten. And what I found interesting in that story is that the local state's attorney said he has tried to investigate those things, several of those incidents, and has always been told we can't release that because of security. The corrections, long before Governor Pritzker came along, the corrections department was hid information behind this idea that we are trying to remain secure. This could be a story that does have some legs and could cause the governor problems.
Sure. All right. Well, that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Capitol View. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank my guests, Sarah and John O'Connor. Please join us again next time.